So it's important to understand why we might even try to maintain diversity or where this diversity comes from. So diversity meaning genetic variation, the differences that we have in our genes, why not all humans look the same and why there's different subspecies of things like that. Where does this come from? Why is this still here? One of the reasons that we still have, or there's a lot of diversity, comes from natural selection. Our book gives two reasons. It says, first, it's really important to remember that evolution doesn't start from scratch. So you can only evolve from what you're given, just like your textbook says, you can only bake a cake with the ingredients that you have. So your textbook says that it might be nice for birds to have lightweight titanium bones because they could fly really easily, but their bones are made out of calcium, so they can't evolve to have titanium bones because that's not what they started with. And your textbook also says that imperfections are common. So we're not perfect organisms. Nothing's perfect because of necessary compromises. So we are really lucky in the fact that we evolved the use of our hands. We have dexterous fingers, and that really helped us become the advanced species that we are today with our ability to make tools and use our hands for things like that. But to be able to use our hands, we had to start walking on our hind limbs. And this is advantageous that we have our hands, but our backs were not made to walk on our hind limbs. So that's why we have a lot of back problems as human beings, because we are not meant to walk upright. So that, again, is a cost-benefit analysis. But it's a compromise that was necessary for us to become as advanced as we are today. And remember that sexual selection, like we just talked about, has a reproductive advantage, not an adaptive advantage. So those birds, the birds of paradise with the really flamboyant males, the females are choosing those because it helps them survive and reproduce, not necessarily because it helps them be more adaptive to the environment. So that's important to remember. And the second thing your textbook says is that we have to remember that environment plays a role in maintaining diversity. So it's really easy to see that things like disruptive selection can lead to diversity in a population because we're selecting for two different phenotypes. An example of this would be the subspecies of all these snakes. This is on page 302 in your textbook. So we can see that these are all the same species of snake, but depending on the area that they live in, they've evolved to be a little bit different. So they're subspecies, they can still interbreed, but because of the variation that they had and the different environments that they live in, they've maintained a lot of diversity. Then there's this thing called heterozygote advantage, and this is when the heterozygous phenotype is favored over the two homozygous phenotypes. And this way, we're maintaining diversity because we're keeping both those alleles present in the population. So having a big A and a little a is adaptive over a big A and a big A, or a little a and a little a, so that's why we maintain both big A and little a in the population. And one example of this is sickle cell disease, which I'm sure you guys have all heard of. Well, sickle cell disease is a pretty terrible disease, but the reason why it's still so prevalent in populations is because if you are heterozygous for the disease, meaning you have one dominant allele and one recessive allele, you actually have an advantage if you are coming from Africa. So if you have two copies of the recessive allele, you have sickle cell disease, and you will tend to die early and leave few offspring due to the hemorrhaging and organ destruction that you have from this odd-shaped red blood cell. But if you are heterozygous for it, you are likely to avoid having malaria. So having one copy of the disease, one copy of the recessive allele is actually advantageous. So that's why this disease lives on. So you can see here that areas that are yellow are very malaria ridden, and areas that are red are sickle cell ridden. And you can see that this blue stuff is where they are both there. So it's very advantageous to have both a copy of the dominant and recessive allele. It helps you survive much longer.